Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is a new episode of Photoshop Tips and Tricks. And today we have a question from Michael Lane. He asks, Sean, can you show some examples of how Photoshop CS6 and Illustrator CS6 would work together? That's a very good question because actually I don't really show a lot of Illustrator on this channel because it's a Photoshop channel. However, a lot of the Adobe creative suites work together. Some do other things better than others, so you use the best of both worlds, and they all interact with each other. They're very native and can be used together. So, actually, that question has me thinking. How could you use these both together? What is an example? As there's many examples, but what's a good one to show? Well, first of all, yesterday I was actually working on a flyer in Illustrator, and a lot of the images that I was using in Illustrator, I was editing them in Photoshop. So I would do my edits in Photoshop because I'm very used to Photoshop and I feel comfortable with Photoshop, and then I would do the heavy lifting in Photoshop and then do the everything else in Illustrator. However, there's some times where you want to use things in Illustrator and vice versa, bring them into Photoshop. You want to do what's best. You want to do what the program does best and then use the other program for the other stuff. So it really does depend on what you're doing. I do a lot of my text and a lot of my fonts in Illustrator because it's very powerful. It's very powerful with shapes and whatnot. And of course, if you're doing any illustrations in your work. And that's what I was doing actually yesterday, and I was doing a lot of the regular JPEG image TIFF editing in Photoshop and bringing them back and forth. And basically what you could do is, sometimes I even hold down the layer and drag it right into Illustrator, or I copy and paste or open up a new document into Illustrator and then from one document drag right into the next document. So there's different ways of working simultaneously back and forth with the program. Now, how would you actually use this in a real world situation? Here's some pretty neat things. I always tell people, use what one program does better and doesn't have than the other one and incorporate it into that program. Kind of like what I just said before, So here's something kind of neat that I was messing with the other day. I thought about this question and I kind of messed around with some concept ideas. This has a really great brush library, Illustrator. Okay, I was going into artistic. There's one here called charcoal pencil. Now check this out. This is kind of neat. Here we have our brushes here, our styles. And normally what you could do is you could do those of you that haven't messed with Illustrator, take like a circle, for example, and just drag that shape right onto it. Look at that. The whole point of this is that, watch this. You could take this, okay, you could copy it. Now watch. I'm going to jump to Photoshop, and I'm going to paste. And then look at this. This is interesting. It tells you, well, what do you want it to paste as? I usually use the first two. I usually use it as a smart object, which seems to be very powerful in Photoshop. That's pretty cool that you can incorporate it into a smart object. So I mostly use that. Or you could also use pixels if you want to break it up into something. So for this example, we're going to do smart object. And I would hit OK. And look at that. Now you have that with the power of Photoshop. And you can resize, you can edit it, you could whatever you want to do with it. Okay? So that's cool, right? That's pretty neat. Okay. One example. And you don't have to apply these swatches to a particular shape or object. You could just drag these right over as is. I'll give you an example. Look at this. Okay? This is kind of neat. Okay? We're going to copy that. Again, we're going to paste it. Smart Object, right into Photoshop. There you go. And now you can free transform, change the color, do whatever you want with it. It's now brought into Photoshop, basically as vector images, as what Illustrator uses. There was also another thing I was messing with. Let's get rid of this. Let's actually get rid of this too. And we'll bring some of these over. Actually, there was some really cool watercolor effects also. Yeah, this is kind of neat. Look at this. Even though this is a vector-based program, there's some really cool water effects here. Watercolor brushes. Now this is also something else interesting. Now I could take all these at once and copy them and bring these into Photoshop as well. Okay, let's get rid of these. Okay, I want to paste these in. But look, I could also do pixels. Now that they're pixels, these are actually individual. Not so much individual layers. I could put them on their own individual layer. But I could also go like this. Oops. Watch this. It's not doing it. Hold on here. Okay. I was using the wrong tool. Sorry about that. But anyway, I wanted to show you that you can actually pick these apart once you select what you want to select. Okay, so now I can actually separate these and isolate these. Then I can add these to their own layer if I wanted to. So, pixels or smart objects, I guess it depends on what you want to do with the layer. Okay? Now, those are some examples. Here's another cool example of doing this vice versa. I like the custom shapes in Photoshop. In Illustrator, instead of actually drawing an arrow, there's some really cool custom shapes in Photoshop. And I was messing around with some of these, so let's just take something as simple as an arrow. Then what we could do is, we could copy that. Copy this arrow. And we could also paste this into Illustrator. So we're doing it vice versa. Now, Illustrator is going to come up with a little bit of a different dialog box. It's going to say compound path, faster, or compound shape, fully editable. We want to do whatever is the most editable, so we want to do compound shape. And there you go. Now, please note, when you release this mouse cursor, this arrow is not going to appear. You're not going to see it even though it's there. The reason why is because natively Illustrator doesn't understand the shapes directly from Photoshop, so it's not adding a fill or a stroke. So you want to make sure that you do your fill and stroke first. Okay? And then once you do that, there you go. And now you can just do your normal resizing or whatever you want to do, or even break this apart and change the shape of it if you'd like. So it's vice versa. It works both ways. Okay? Here's another interesting little thing that I was messing with yesterday. This is kind of a little bit more involved, but pretty neat. I have a picture here in Photoshop of the sunset. Here's a little something neat that you can do. Like I said, mess around with this. Use the best of both worlds. Go back and forth. Use what you can. You know? I went into Illustrator, and then I went into symbol libraries, and I went into dot pattern vector pack. Okay? It's a mouthful, but... And what I did was I used this third one here. I found this to be a very interesting shape, and then I started thinking creatively. What can I do with this? What would the possibilities be with this as opposed to just Illustrator? What could I bring this into Photoshop for? Okay, well, let's see. So, again, we're going to copy that from Illustrator. We're going to jump back to Photoshop. We're going to paste this in. I'm going to paste it as pixels. Okay. And we're going to mess around with the size. Doesn't have to be anything specific, but let's try to get it to fit into the image somewhat. Okay. Hit the check mark to save the changes. Now, what I would like to do is we have two layers here, okay? We have our background layer, and we have the layer of the shape that we just incorporated from Illustrator. So what I did was I turned the background layer into layer 1 and layer 0, and I made sure that I put the JPEG image on the top layer and our little Illustrator vector shape on the bottom. And then what I did was I created a clipping path. Now look at that. How cool is that? And you can still click on the image and move the image around while the shape stays there. So you can just the whole point of this is just look at the possibilities. Look at the cool custom design and shapes that you can come up with by combining these two powerful programs together. So that was kind of neat. I was messing around with that. So yeah, it's endless really. You could go back and forth and you can keep coming up with ideas. I could keep going on and on with this tutorial, but you get the idea. So definitely check that out, mess around with that, try different things, try copying, pasting, try doing it as a smart object, try doing it as pixels, and you could definitely use these programs together. I hope that answered your question. Try that out, let me know how you like it, and I'll talk to you again soon on the next tutorial. Take care.